nobody really had a lot of sense on how to deal with high volume complaints, because that's literally what it was. And it was all, this is going to be customer focused. I mean, it started off, everything was paper based. Everything was paper based. And we had to do, FOS insisted that we did a quarterly audit of PPI.
This would be such a good podcast with everything that you're saying here now. It would be such an appropriate podcast.
I do it silhouetted out.
Yeah.
Everything. So once a quarter, we had to do this audit, and there were literally hundreds of thousands of files, and we had to go through and account for every one, and you had to put a label on it, sticky label on it, to say that had been included in the audit. I mean, this is how ridiculous it was. And the chap who was running it at the time, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, the FOS had this thing that they would update the client every month or 2 months, I think it was every month actually, on the progress of their complaint. And it literally was a thing that, your complaint's still being looked into, we'll let you know further on. He then had this thing that, he wanted a bespoke letter going out detailing what had actually happened in the last month. And I calculated out, you'd need a team of, I think it was about 186 people just to do that one task. That'd be their full-time job. There were so many of them that if you had to go in and look at every complaint and say, well, in the last 30 days we've done X, Y, and Z, it was crazy. Horner, his name was. Can't remember his first name.
It does make you it does me think, is a almost like government funded entity such as the FOS now seeing this as an opportunity to just absolutely cash in. And then it does make you go one step further to go, if you were an entity such as FOS and you was the government and you was trying to cut all of this government spending and whatever, would you make the redress system purposely ambiguous that would give the FOS, the car finance lenders, a way to go, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to give you a final response letter and not uphold your complaint, forcing everything into FOS so FOS can cash in for, say, 12 or 18 months.
Yeah, but then the other side of that is that if you did that, you elongate the process by years. That's totally. The first thing. The second thing is they haven't got the people to handle all these complaints, and they'd have to go on a massive drive to bring in all these people. They would be they were under so much stress in the PPI. I think they bring in a fee to discourage people from using them. And I think that won't change. I think they're going to try everything they can to. I don't think FOS are going to play a big part in this. I really don't.
Really?
Yeah, I don't. I think it. Well, you're not doing a subjective review here, are you? I mean, if the Supreme Court say it's unfair, it's unfair, and there weren't any Plevin cases went to FOS simply because they were all gone through the court. But where you've got a ruling that it's unfair, what can someone then reject a complaint on? They can only reject it on that you would have had prior knowledge because, say, of your employment or something, to have realised that commission would have been paid on that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And outside of that, you ain't got anything.
Go on.
You ain't got anything outside of that. But you can't say, no. I mean, no one's going to say, well, our salespeople, it was their policy to tell everybody the full extent of the commission and how it would affect their payments, and told them how much their monthly payments increased, but on the basis of commission. The FCA, under their own guidance, said that, when they brought in this commission disclosure to IFAs, you had to explain not only how much commission you were earning, but what impact that commission had on your policy. So, i.e., if you were taking out like a pension, what does that, if you didn't have commission on your policy, what would you get at the end? If you did have commission on the policy, what would you get at the end? And that had to be explained and put in the quotation. And that was in all the sort of know your customer documents and key findings reports and everything had to show that. Now, if they had to show that back in 20 years ago for that, why the hell they didn't move that onto car finance, I don't know.
Well, you see that they've actually been questioned on Tuesday at 10 a.m. in the Commons by MPs. And I was going to put together a letter just saying, that try and send it to all of the MPs on the Treasury Committee who are doing basically I think it's chairwoman of the Treasury Committee, the FOS, and the sort of interim CEO now are being quizzed by MPs.
Yeah, well, see, that's why I wonder whether that's why she pulled out.
What, because they were going to be quizzed? On what basis would you think she wouldn't want to be quizzed?
That she's not comfortable with what's going on, or she wasn't comfortable with the charges, or they're going to ask questions that is going to bring FOS into, I won't say disrepute, but into question.
What, in terms of like a defect for purpose, like the whole FCA thing? And I like it.
The other bloke, the deputy chap, is now taking her place on that Tuesday meeting, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I do want... See, I think if the FCA get this wrong, then that's the end for them. If they fuck this up, they fucked up so much. I mean, they got rid of the PIA and brought in the FCA. Will they get rid of the FCA and bring in whatever you want to call it? But you've got to think, how fit for purpose are they? I mean, there was a bloke put something online that he thought that the FCA were actually going to make the redress so woolly. I don't know if you saw that. Actually going to make the redress so woolly that firms can't follow it, and then that gives them an excuse to fine them to get more funds.
So you reckon the FCA would fine the car finance lenders?
Yeah, because they haven't followed. The guidance is the FCA are renowned for not giving guidance as such. Well, they call, not giving instruction on how to do something, just setting out, if you like, woolly guidance for you to interpret to follow it how you feel fit. And there's been question that will this just be another one of them? And then they just can go in and say to Lloyds, okay, you fucked up on these 6 million claims, we'll fine you £60 million.
Yeah, wow.
Jobs are good.
I love a conspiracy theory, but fuck me, that would be ridiculous.
You've got to think who ultimately is to blame for this. And the way I look at it, is it the lender or is it the person who's regulating the lender who let it happen?
Yeah, I agree. I think the FCA is definitely to blame. Yeah. I 100% agree with that.
I don't know whether why has anyone never questioned them? Why did they deem it necessary to bring in commission disclosure for IFAs on what could have been a £10 a month term policy, where there's even no investment, or why was that deemed necessary? Why was the IFA market full of sharks and the car industry full of angels? That makes any sense to me.
So would you say that the true finger should be being pointed at the FCA on all of the car finance stuff?
Yeah.
Because I suppose there's one way to look at it is that, like we've said a million times, is that the car finance dealers, no one's really pointing fingers at the dealers because they were given a product to sell and they were given parameters how to sell it. And, if that resulted in bigger commission, that's what they were there to do. And like you say, all of the lenders had in their terminology that we may pay an agreement, and we saw how quickly they were able to completely redo all of their documents within like 4 or 5 days after the Johnson judgment. So would you say that when the FCA initially banned DCAs, they already knew exactly how the entire industry was operating?
Yeah, they didn't find that out in 2021 and banned it straight away, did they? They knew that for ages. They had to have known that for ages. Because, I mean, if you really think about it, if me and you were running a Lucas Ford, and we'd have a meeting every week, wouldn't we? And we'd be saying to the salespeople on the forecourt, right, our target this week is to shift X number of cars. But ultimately, as you and I know, the main money for lookers wasn't in shifting the cars, it's in selling the finance. And so those meetings wouldn't have been, I want you to sell 10 cars this week, Sam. It'd be, I want you to do 10 finance this week and bring in X amount of revenue for lookers forward. And so you can then say, well, so the salesperson was being pushed by lookers. And so then you could say the buck stops there, but lookers were then being pushed by Black Horse, say, if that was who Black Horse Finance. Mm. And then Black Horse was saying, well, yeah, our regulator allows us to do this, this and this so far. So we're following what the regulator has allowed us to do. And you can go ahead and do that because the regulator allows it. And so who's really at fault? It's the regulator.
So I suppose to go one step further on this whole conspiracy theory, would you say that the intervention or the proposed intervention by the Treasury into the whole Johnson case in the Supreme Court could actually be not a bit of a Hail Mary for car finance lenders, but it could be an intervention to make sure the FCA doesn't get the book thrown at them here, and the FCA remains to be a regulator, and they don't basically put the nail in the coffin that's going to end them.
Yeah, I think there's some truth in that, because why else would the FCA be so keen as to have their say at the, are they having their say because they want to protect the consumer, which is what they are really there for? No, if they want to protect the consumer, they would shut up because the court has already protected the consumer. Or are they covering their own arse?
Yeah, they're getting everything on record, or we did this, we did that. And I mean, there is also massive calls from the government at the minute for deregulation across everything as well, isn't it? But that would it further put a target on the back of the FCA.
Yeah, I mean, you have the question really, how effective the FCA are in what they do, which isn't very.
Isn't very, yeah.
And and exactly what is the hidden agenda in speaking out at this court case?
So would you say that on the FOS stuff then, in terms of this Abby Thomas, I think it was the CEO, who's currently left, do you think she's left because she can see the end of the FOS coming? And it's nothing to do with the fact that they said about fees and stuff. It could actually be just there's a bit more internal workings within the FOS that say that if they don't make this £250 a fee work and become a profitable entity, the FOS will be no more.
Well, I think you have to question really what the role of the Financial Ombudsman Service actually is, because it's not doing what it was set out to do. It was originally set up to deal with being an adjudicator on difficult claims and on sort of one-off scenarios which the insurance companies or lenders or banks or whatever you want to call them and the customer couldn't reach an agreement on a dispute. It was never ever set up to look at PPI complaints, bank charging complaints, and all stuff like that. I can tell you some almost laughable stories of complaints that have ended up at FOS when I worked for Halifax, looking after the FOS team and dealing with complaints. And I kid you not, we had a woman who wrote to FOS because she didn't like the answer she got from the Halifax, and she was complaining about how annoying the adverts were on telly. That got to FOS. The number of cases that went to FOS because people weren't happy with the explanation they were given on why their local branch was closed. And all those type of things were going to FOS. Now, FOS was never set up to do that. FOS was set up to look at, I moved my pension from the NHS final salary scheme into a personal pension plan, I was advised to do it because I wasn't married and, you know, I didn't need the spouse's benefit, etc., etc. And, you know, that was what I was told. And the company said, well, no, you knew what you were doing. We're not going to uphold it. And they were there to look at that type of scenario. They weren't there to look at, did I tick a box on a form to say I want a PPI on? And it moved away as, you know, as regulated complaints fell off when they have done really, you know, once the endowment review finished, you know, to move on to non-regulated complaints. And FOS took on these non-regulated complaints. That's where they made a rod for their own back.
So do you think this whole idea of it being like a FOS redress scheme, that is, from your knowledge of working for the FOS, would be like a complete non-starter, unless they were doing a massive recruitment drive, like you said, and they would probably have to have started that recruitment now?
Yeah, I mean, if you take what the figures that the FCA say, and if you take that there are 33 million of these claims, and if you say conservatively a quarter of them are going to complain, and then that's probably conservative, but that's still 8 million complaints. And if you say that 10% of those complaints are going to be kicked out, that's 800,000 potential FOS complaints. And when you think that each one of them has to be looked at by an adjudicator, it's then sent out, you can then challenge that adjudication. So too can the bank. Then it'll go to an ombudsman. And once it's then got to the ombudsman then makes a decision. If you're the bank, you have to accept the decision. If you're the consumer, you could take it to court. And how many people are you going to need to run that project?
Yeah, you know, when you break it down like that, that is insane. How many files could an adjudicator be looking at any one time?
They were targeted when I was there to do 10 a week.
In a week?
Yeah, all right. But hold on. Nobody ever got anywhere near that target.
I was going to say, well, 10 a week is super low considering you'd think 800,000.
Yeah, but that's 2 a day. But because you had to go through everything, you had to ring the customer, you had to get statements, you had to go to the bank. It's not like I could pick up a file and then by lunchtime I'd have done it. I couldn't. You'd be picking it up, you'd be putting it down, you'd be picking it up, you'd be putting it down. And, you know, they used to run, each adjudicator would have about 100 files and they would all be going in a cycle. And, you know, realistically, we were getting to about 7 a week per person.
7 a week per person. And then how many of those 7 a week would you say would get escalated to an actual ombudsman?
Well, do you know how many ombudsmen there were in 2010 looking at all the ombudsman complaints?
Go on.
2.
How many? What about in the PPI days?
This was the PPI days.
Yeah, but like, you know, if you took PPI, actual
later
PPI.
on, yeah. I don't know how many they had later on, but that was the running joke, that it would actually, people would be dead and retired before they'd be able to have their case looked. Because an ombudsman would take a couple of days looking at a case.
Yeah, one case.
Yeah. I mean, the in-depth thing, again, this is the thing that, you know, it's not set up to look at PPI complaints and bank charges complaints. It's set up to look at complex complaints where you would need a sort of official ombudsman to go through it. But the ombudsman cannot handle this. I mean, they couldn't handle it in the PPI days. I don't know what it's like now. I mean, they may have moved away from the paper formatting. They may have done this, that and the other. But, you know, even still, if they had 8,000 complaints, you'd need a hell of a team to look at that.
I mean, just from if you was handling 800,000 complaints as a law firm, as a FMC, you would need a hell of a lot of the team. You know, let alone looking into, you know, why both two sides are arguing over a specific fact.
Yeah. I mean, you had to obviously go out and get a statement from the client. You had to go out and get a statement from the firm. You have to ask the firm for all the documents to send in all the paper documents. You would then assess all the documents and was the evidence given by the client contradicted in the documents or not. And, so there was that type of investigation that went on, without being disrespectful, the people who were working there were quite skilled people, even the adjudicator levels. They weren't your normal admin staff.
That's crazy. I didn't actually realise it was that bad, to be fair. I mean, you hear all the horror stories and you read it all. But it makes you then start to think, about, did you see that Financial Times article about when the FCA was actually being investigated about its time to respond to Freedom of Information Request Act, and they were just like consistently failing. So it just makes you think, well, if that's the FOS, the FCA will be no different.
I tell you, mate, it is. I just think that they need to get this Supreme Court thing out of the way. They need to then put together a review that is watertight and a redress system that can't be challenged. Because if they don't do that, they could bring down FOS, they could bring themselves down. I think they'll bring down everything. Because it just won't be workable.
I was going to say, that's really interesting that you say that. So you think that, because obviously the way my mind is working is that they go and make it really hard to limit the redress to the banks and protect the banks. But in actual fact, what they need to do is make it so efficient that it doesn't bring themselves down.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And see, the other thing you have to do, I mean, you look at the Bank of England's announcement and when they cut the interest rates, and they've now predicted the growth to be half of what was done. You start to flood the normal man in the street with an additional £2,000 that he didn't have. What's he going to do with that £2,000?
Yeah, spend it.
Yeah. And so what's that going to do to the economy? It's going to, all this Rachel Reeve thing about, no one will be able to afford it. They'll be able to afford to buy a car because they've now got the deposit for it.
Yeah, well, this is what we've always said, isn't it? That during PPI, and I don't know why everyone overlooks it, but it's actually credited with bringing you out of the...
It did, without any question. And I mean, even to an extent, it was sort of almost like a stealth way of getting the banks to pay tax because they were taking the 20% off the statutory interest in income tax. And that was being paid for, obviously, by the bank in a way. And so they were getting money out of the banks to pay for tax. And all these things seem to get overlooked when people just say, it's just going to bring down the motor industry. No, it won't. If anything, it could enhance it because there'll be more money out there to buy.
Well, I think they've already shot themselves in the foot with that because the whole thing that Rachel Reeves was coming out, if you look at the Finance and Leasing Association's application to intervene, it was something like £38 billion worth of car finance lending was put out in the 12 months prior to November 2024. You're just like, well, where's the slowdown? They've already banned the commissions. You're telling me that you're going to put out so much money in compensation that you're going to refuse £38 billion worth of additional lending? No way. They're just going to go and get more money. If the demand's there, they're going to get more money. Well, it's all like when you... Go on.
The only thing you have to really look at is what can banks borrow money at and what can they lend it at? And if the banks are in trouble because they're being hit with lots and lots of claims, and so the balance sheet is down, surely the way out of that is to go and get money from somewhere else and lend it out at a higher price.
Well, it would just be an offset, wouldn't it? If you was trying to do some sort of shareholder mitigation or a share price mitigation, you would go, right, I'm going to put out £1 billion or 10 billion quid worth of compensation for car finance, but I've actually got 40 billion quid worth of lending that I'm going to do this year or over the next 10 years. You just go, well, all right, they either break even, one outweighs the other slightly, or just go away and do more business. And it's not like it's not like the small or anything like that. They've got no forecourts. The argument really does fall apart when you start to strip it all down and don't read the headlines.
No, I mean, that's a load of bollocks. I mean, I'm surprised that someone hasn't just pulled her to one side in a quiet room and said, you need to pipe down about this, because this could be your get out of jail card for it. But
Yeah. Well, that's why we wrote to them. We did you remember that letter that we wrote?
yeah,
And it was saying this is how, and that was when the analyst was saying it was only worth 23 billion, but I think Moody's are at like 32 billion now or something like that. It's obviously going to go higher. But you
yeah.
just think, well, this could be such a land grab by the government and the Treasury, of course. You know, I'll tell you one thing I was going to ask you was, in PPI, they taxed you on the compensation, right?
Only the statutory interest element.
Right, that you just answered the question. That was my question. You're going to get taxed on only the statutory interest element.
Yeah, because what it was determined was that the actual redress was split. First, you had your PPI premiums. Well, you'd actually paid them, if you think about it, out of your net salary, because so you'd have already paid tax, if you like, on that.
Correct.
Then there was the credit card company interest, or the associated interest for that credit card loan, and again you paid that. But the statutory interest was deemed as unearned income, and it was deemed as an investment interest, like if you just put the money in a building society, and that was why that was taxed.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, did they account for inflation?
Did they account for inflation? What do you mean, in what way?
Well, if you got awarded 8% stat interest, but inflation's at 12%, do they account for the fact that everything's stupidly high now and that 8%'s gone absolutely nowhere?
No, but that weren't the case, was it?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, that's why I think it is going to be a struggle to get 8% stat interest on car loans, because if you look at the interest rate from 2007 to today, and you take what that average interest rate is, 8% dwarfs it. Massively.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, massively.
And so I think that, you know, if you had £1,000 in your pocket in 2007, what's that actually worth today? And that's probably not what will be 10, 17 years, 18 years, say. So 18, so 80, 64, 144%. Yeah, that wouldn't now be worth 2,400 quid, would it? And so therefore, that's where I think they might go. You know, no, they might not, but they might. I would be surprised if they didn't set it at 6 or even 5%.
Well, we've seen it across the board, haven't we? From what the courts awarded, I think the lowest we've seen is like 1.
Yeah, I mean the courts. Yeah, the courts don't really know, do they? But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, be interesting times, mate.
No, it's very interesting. I actually sent that WhyAbby Thomas a message on LinkedIn last night after I read it, just saying, "Yeah, do you want to get a job at Sentinel?" Because I thought, imagine bringing someone like her on.
Yeah,
just ahead of this, you'd just be like, "Wow, okay."
I don't know her. She wasn't there when I was there. There's this chap Horner was heading it up. I mean, he didn't have a clue. I don't know what she's like at all.
Yeah, well, it looks like she's only been there since 2022.
Yeah, she hasn't been long.
Yeah, not been there long at all.
There are still people contracting at FOS who were there when I was started there in 2010. I know contractors who are still there and have been there full-time contracting since 2010.
Contracting?
Yeah. I mean, obviously now they're contracting through an umbrella company, but they are still contracting there, and they have been since 2009, maybe.
No. It's just government inefficiencies, isn't it? It's just ridiculous. Yeah. But I mean, it's just crazy that, I don't know, it's almost like the perfect storm that car finance claims are kind of like I'm on the fence. I thought they were being attacked by the government, but after that one last night, I'm like, is the government secretly on our side because they see this as a massive cash grab for them from across a multiple different.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this will, without doubt, increase growth in this country. It's got to. It's almost a given. And when the growth predictions are half of what they should have been under a new government, you're going to move hell and high water to push that up, aren't you?
Yeah, 100%. This is what I don't understand, because every single thing that's been reported on about the Labour government and the Treasury, and there's that massive one going around about Keir Starmer going, "We'll never put your council tax up. You're not doing it." I think he said it about 100 times in his campaign, and then he puts the council tax up. And I think if you've got this many people sort of almost defecting to reform, and you're cancelling local elections and all of this sort of stuff, you would just go for such a big positive win, which is just let car finance claims happen, wouldn't you? Just because one, it genuinely puts money in people's pockets, but two, look at how much cash that the government's going to rake in just from corporation tax alone.
Yeah. So the other thing you've got to think of is you're also giving that money to the people you want to give it to. And what I mean by that is, all these people took car loans. All these people are used to taking credit. All these people are used to spending money. You're not giving it to my mum, who would put it.
He's going to put it under a bed.
Even at the age of 89, she'd put it in some savings.
Yeah.
You're giving it, and that was the same literally with PPI. You're giving it to the people who will spend it.
No, yeah, it's very, very, very good point, mate.